We're not about trying to find people who look good enough to make us, this sort of award-winning couple when we walk down the street. We're not trying to find people whose degrees happen to be compatible so we can maximize our earnings. What we are trying to do is find people who meet the biblical qualifications so that we can establish biblical families that believe in those two priorities that God has given us for marriage. One, procreation, not just having children, although we ought to have a bunch of them, but raising them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord so that we can loose them on the world for the cause of Christ. And secondly, this idea of illustration, this idea that our marriage would be a living, breathing example and picture of the relationship between Christ and his church. That's what we're looking for. It's built on biblical love, an act of the will accompanied by emotion that leads to action on behalf of its object. It's made up of men who meet the biblical qualifications. They must be able to lead in love, to lead in the word, to lead in righteousness, to lead in selflessness, and to lead in intimacy. And it's based on women who meet the biblical qualifications for being godly wives. They must be submissive. First and foremost, they must be submissive to the Lord Jesus Christ. Secondly, they must be submissive to the authority that God has over them right now. And thirdly, they must be submissive to the biblical portrait of marriage. When we have this, then we'll have the kind of marriages that will cause the world to stop and take notice and eventually come to us and say, can you help us? Because we would give anything to have what you have. My wife and I have had millionaires in our home asking us to help them rescue their marriages. Millionaires sitting at our table saying we've got everything and we would give it all away to have what you two have. Why? Because they bought a lie. Don't you do that. Marriage must be what God designed it to be. He must be what God requires him to be. She must be what God requires her to be. And quite frankly, it doesn't really concern me if the culture appreciates this. Because newsflash, the culture is terrible at marriage. If the culture was out there, setting records and staying married and being happy, and maybe I'd listen to their criticism. Well, I just don't like that whole submission thing. And in the words of that famous theologian, Dr. Phil, how's that working for you? But the one who created marriage is the one who determines how it works. And if we want it to thrive, we must do it on his terms.